Welcome, everybody. My name is Chris Worley, and today with Beth Gunderson, we're going to kind of overview, introduce one of the really key fundamental models that we'll be talking about when we all get to sunny and warm Minneapolis next month. So Beth and I are working today. Our other colleague, Sue Mohrman, is in Turkey with her son-in-law and his family, and spending time with the grandkids. But she'll be joining us in Minneapolis, and you get a chance to meet her and work with Sue as well. So welcome, and what I'd like to do is over the next 45 minutes or so, kind of introduce some of these issues and backgrounds and models. Just a couple of housekeeping issues. You'll notice on the right-hand side of your screen, there's should be a panel that looks something like this. If it doesn't look exactly like that, that's okay. It's just the way it started up. As Alice mentioned, she's muted your line so that we can have a more or less clear audio signal here. Not that my voice wouldn't mess it up, but at least you'll be able to hear me clearly. There's a chat box down in the lower right. If you don't have a chat, you can kind of move your cursor on your screen to the bottom center of your screen, and there should be a little menu that pops up, and the little balloon there. If you click on that, you should be able to pick up the chat function. If you have questions during the time when I'm talking to you, and you got a question, by all means, feel free. Beth or Alice will, find a very clever way to interrupt me, and we can address the questions kind of as we go. And plus, we'll have the opportunity to have some questions at the end. During the presentation, we're going to have a couple of polls just to kind of get a sense of where people are at in terms of their experience and expectations for the workshop. And as those questions come up, they'll pop up on this screen on the right-hand side. So, and again, we're recording this so that some of the people who may be in different time zones or countries and can't be with us can still listen to the program presentation. Okay? So with that, here's a couple of pictures so you can kind of see who's the face behind the voice on the thing. I'm a research scientist at the center. Beth is an executive fellow at the center, and Sue is a colleague currently in Turkey and enjoying her grandkids. So she'll be with us in Minneapolis. But that's kind of the group that will be working with you during the week. At the end of the week, Becky Spears from Oracle will also join us to talk about her experiences and how she sort of translated the material and how she first started thinking about applying the course material at her work at the time she was at Sun Microsystems before it was acquired by Cisco. So she'll come at the end as well to talk about her experiences, and it's always one of the high points of the week at the end of the week when she chats. So purpose kind of our webinar today, we want to be sure and get some understanding and knowledge. Okay, apparently I wasn't moving the slides through, so that's good. We want to get your experience and expectations so that we can sort of adjust as necessary or as possible the kinds of things we talk about and focus on at the workshop so that we're meeting your needs. We're going to spend probably a majority of the time just giving a very high-level introduction and description of the star model on the right. That's the J. Galbraith star model. We think it's arguably the most well-known and most widely used framework for organization design. And so we want to start giving you some language and vocabulary and principles behind the STAR model, because it sort of looks really simple. That's one of the beauties of it. And then as soon as you start digging into it, boy, it becomes a very powerful model as well as kind of pretty there. So we'll be talking about that. And then toward the end here, I'll turn it over to Beth, and she'll talk a little bit about the kinds of things you can do to get the most out of the workshop. You're spending a good chunk of your week, 3.5 days with us, and we want to be sure to set you up as best as we can to get the most out of it, not only during the week, but after the workshop is over. And then we'll, again, if everything goes according to plan, we should have, 10, 15 minutes so that we can answer any questions. You can ask Alice about any logistics issues, or you can ask Beth and I about application and concept ideas. Okay? So with that, Alice, give me the next slide so I can speak to what we're doing. The first thing we want to do is sort of get a sense of the audience, right, and have some fun while we're doing it, right? And so we put together kind of this fun way of saying, as you think about your own experience with organization design, where do you sit on this not-so-scientific scale? Are you the kind of person who's like, I've never heard of OrgDesign. It's kind of interesting. It sounds good. I'd like to know more about it. Are you kind of the, I've watched a bunch of consultants come through here and mess it up. I would like to know how to do that. Are you the kind of person who's actually tried it a few times? You've experienced it. You've led some design efforts, and you've been part of messing it up or helping to mess it up, and you can do better? Or are you a rock star at this, and you've been involved in some things, and you're on fire about OrgDesign, and you want to know more? So where do you sit with that, Alice? If you could pull up the poll, and those answers should sort of come up on the screen on your right side. Just take 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and figure out where you're at on that. And, click on the appropriate button. And then let's see what our group sort of looks like in terms of their level of experience. And when you see everybody logged in now, let's go ahead and put the results up.
Okay.
Yeah, looks like we've got a good group, good sized group today.
Yeah, I think we're good. Let's see.
And just for those of you that are answering it, we did this with the first webinar and had pretty much we had a range of things. So it'll be interesting to see how that compares to this group.
There's a result. There you go.
Cool. Excellent. Excellent. Again, pretty good range. It looks like there's maybe a little bit of a majority there in the I've messed it up and helped to mess it up. But also some people who are very new to this, and at least one person who feels like, I've kind of been around the block with this stuff before, and I want to dig in. So pretty good range here of experience, and so that again kind of tells us to be sure and pay attention to explaining some concepts for those that are new to this, but also giving the people who have had some experience with it an opportunity to get their fingers dirty and strengthen some muscles around this kind of stuff. So that's great. Appreciate people talking about it. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I look at where we've got the majority of we've got 5 folks who answered C, that they've messed it up or helped mess it up. I think if you are anywhere on this continuum on those first 3, what the week that you're going to spend with us will really help you do is start framing a lot of the things you've been working on in the context of a more systems thinking approach. So we'll be using the STAR model, which Chris is going to take us into here in just a minute. But I think what all of you will find, no matter if you're in a business partner role or a specialist role, is that you think about a lot of the things that relate to OrgDesign, but you maybe never put it into this holistic perspective or framework. So I think you're going to come away after the 3.5 days together really with a cohesive sense of how you can go back and think even more strategically about org design. So whether you're doing it from a maybe an OE, OD, role, or if you're a business partner talking with your line client, I think the frameworks and tools that we give you will be equally applicable. So over to you, Chris.
Cool, thanks. Now let's give me the next slide. I can start talking about this stuff. I've been waiting and hoping that I get to talk about this. Okay, so one of the things that we will talk about, and building on the stuff that Beth just mentioned, we're going to talk about designing organizations. And one of the things you'll notice in this definition, the first is that designing organization is a process. So designing is a verb, right? Designing is it's a set of activities that we engage in organization development, for example, where we have a sequence of activities that lead us to a certain kind of outcome. So in some ways, organization design is a verb because it's a process, and it's a continuous process. It never really stops. I remember one manager that I talked to at Hewlett-Packard, he kept saying that organization design was a daily reconciliation of a bunch of little things, right? It was daily reconciliation of, well, the policy for rewards is this, but the objectives were that, and we needed the more different kinds of people to staff that project, and I keep having to reconcile all these things that are supposed to be orchestrated and headed in the right direction. So we're going to talk about a process. We're going to talk about the redesign flow and the way that you can engage your organization actually leading it through a redesign set of activities. At the same time, we're going to be more focused than we will be on the process. We'll be more focused on the content of organization design, which is represented by the STAR model. We want to talk about those elements, right? We're going to configure the elements of the organization, and we'll use the word elements, features, star points. These actual choices and decisions you have about structures and systems and processes, and we're going to talk about those and the choices that you have in making this configuration, right? So what is the org design? The noun, organization design is a noun. What is the configuration of strategy, systems, and processes that allow you to produce outcomes? It can be financial, business outcomes, customer satisfaction, market share, customer loyalty. It can be employee issues such as engagement, satisfaction, sorts of things. They can also be social outcomes in terms of community relations, social responsibility, sustainability from the ecological point of view, right? So we're going to have this sort of dance between the verb and the noun, how to do the design, but also really focusing during the week on the choices that you have about these elements and the strengths and weaknesses of different elements that result in the configuration that we call an organization's design, okay? So now let's go to the STAR model here so I can yak about that a little bit. Oh, before I do, sorry, I wanted to get the design thinking. The thing we're going to be talking about here is in terms of organization design. And design is a pretty popular word these days. There's a lot of conversations that people are having about design thinking, and we need to have more of a design approach to different things. Usually when they're talking about that kind of design thinking, they're talking about product design, experience design, different ways of thinking about designing products, services, experiences, customer relationships, and things like that. Within that broader issue is this notion of organization design. And so when we talk about design, we are also org design, we are talking about a design thinking process, and it sort of starts in the upper left, right? There's some objectives, challenges, issues that your unit, your organization, your function is trying to achieve, overcome, solve, right, a problem to be solved or a goal to be achieved. That's what we want to do. Now, in trying to achieve that goal or address that problem, there are a set of constraints or criteria. Usually this will come under the kind of the heading of user need or user want or user requirements. There are certain things, if we're trying to solve the problem of climate change, I need to go talk to a variety of stakeholders because individuals, nation states, corporations, citizens, everybody's got a sort of a different point of view about what that solution or problem would look like if it were solved. So we have to come up with a set of criteria that represents a solution that is, acceptable by a variety of stakeholders, and that solution looks like an answer to the problem, or it looks like a solution to the problem, or a way to achieve the goal that we're trying to accomplish. And in there is a tension, right? Not everybody sees the solution or doesn't define the problem or the objective in the same way. And so there's a tension that results in understanding that I have a problem or a demand that needs to be addressed, and the way people want me to address that problem or solve that problem. There's a tension there. And what design thinking does is it tries to resolve that tension by coming up with a solution, in this case, a design, a solution for climate change and how to fix that problem. Now, if you're responsible for coming up with a solution to climate change, not everybody has all the knowledge and skills and competencies required. And so in order to successfully resolve that tension, you need to have a set of first principles, a set of competencies, capabilities, just general abilities, skills and knowledge that allow you to solve that. If you're going to solve climate change, you better be good at some economics issues. You better be good at some biological and ecological, and the science of climate change. You better understand the regulatory process. There's a bunch of things you got to know at the very basic level that allow you to look at that tension at the top and say, here's a way to resolve that tension. Here's a proposal. Here's a solution that might allow you to reach that objective. And what we're trying to do in the OrgDesign class in Minneapolis is to provide you with that set of first principles. And our general belief is that human resources, OE/OD departments and functions tend to be better at managing and addressing change, comp and benefits, employee relations. You have some first principles about that, but what's missing is in your sort of quiver, right, of arrows is the first principles around OrgDesign. And that's what we want to spend time on during the week, is giving you that set of first principles so you can bring alternative solutions to your organizations that will solve and resolve the tension between what is the goal and what does a good solution sort of look like. That's our objective for the week, okay? And now, Alice, you can show me the star. There we go. Thanks. I got a little bit ahead of myself. Again, this is the star model by Jay Galbraith, and what will happen during the week is we're going to walk around this star and describe each of the pieces and sort of the first principles that are involved in designing and the choices that you have with respect to work processes and capabilities, the kind of people you can bring on board, the kind of rewards, reward systems and recognition systems you can put in place, the choices you have around structure. So we're going to look at this model, and one of the first principles out of this model is effectiveness, right? Performance and outcomes of an organization that's being designed is a function of how well these 5 things fit together and the way they fit together in support of the strategy. All right, so that's the basic, one of the first principles here is alignment and coherence and complementarity among these different elements it's what causes organization performance to be high. So if we're going to design for financial performance, we can put this thing together. If we're going to design for community well-being and corporate responsibility, that's going to have some implications for how the choices that we make around these different elements of the STAR. Okay? So what I want to do is go through each of these elements at a very high level, see if I can give you a relatively short definition or description of each one, and maybe even an example to try and tie it down and make it concrete. Okay? You'll notice in the workshop that all of our models begin with strategy. And we have a really strong belief that if you're going to design an organization, you can't really design it until the strategy is clear. And so we'll spend a good chunk of the morning on, in fact, a good chunk of the day on Tuesday thinking about what strategy is and how to define it. And we're not going to become strategists. We're not going to become, EVPs of the strategy function in the organization. But we want to have enough skill and knowledge and frameworks and language that we can help an organization clarify its strategy and sort of describe what it is. So we're going to talk about strategy as a direction. Do you know where you're going? Can you describe where you are today and how tomorrow is expected to be different? We're moving from a certain way of doing business to a different way of doing business. So that's a big part of thinking about strategy. We'll also use some traditional concepts like, being a low-cost strategy or maybe being a differentiated strategy. That's a big part of what we're going to do in the first day. Sorry about that background noise. For those of you who know me, my house is under construction, and the contractors have decided they need to run the really loudest vacuum cleaner they can right now. Okay, so hopefully they just turned it off, and if that was a bother, I apologize. So back to strategy. This strategy is the beginning of design. You'll also notice that when we talk about the process of redesign, it begins with the strategy, because as we go through and redesign the organization, we have to know what we're designing for, and strategy represents one of those key first fundamental building blocks of a good design and a good design process. So an example, the one I used yesterday was, for those of you in the United States, Costco and Walmart, they have kind of a classic traditional low-cost strategy. And that's the way they are trying to achieve their objectives, financial, social, employee. And everybody in the organization understands that. Everybody understands that keeping costs down is the way they're going to be successful. And so it's a widely shared and understood idea inside the organization, from the top management team all the way down to the people who stock the shelves in the warehouse. Everybody understands that that's the means to the end, is keeping costs low. And the more that's widely shared and that direction is understood by people, the easier it is to design an organization. So we'll start with strategy. That'll be the key foundation for all of our choices that we're going to make with respect to the other elements of the STAR. Okay? On to capabilities and work processes. So the idea here is to really get clear about the work the organization does to add value for its customers and other stakeholders. And so usually the simplest way to identify your work processes is to say, tell me what your business unit, tell me what your function, tell me what your organization does. And if I'm talking to Costco, they're going to say, well, we buy stuff and we distribute stuff and we sell stuff to members of Costco. That's their work processes. They buy products, and services from different organizations. They pull them together in the warehouse. They retail and sell those to you in the warehouse. So they buy it, they transport it, and then they merchandise it in the warehouse. That's the work process, and it's no more complicated than that. When we talk about design, what we're talking about is just really understanding what are the key steps, the high level set of activities that give value to customers and other stakeholders, right? So if I ask you what you do in HR, right? Well, we attract, hire, develop, and retain employees. Perfect. Those are your work processes. And what's important is that many HR functions do the same things. The question is, do you do them in ways that are more customized to your particular strategy? If I have a low-cost strategy for the enterprise, and I'm the HR function inside of Costco, I need to attract, retain, develop, right, employees in such a way that it keeps that cost low. That's my contribution. So I'm going to do those in a certain way. Whereas if I'm a high-end retailer, I'm over at Abercrombie and Fitch, or I'm at Prada, the way I hire, retain, and develop employees is going to be very different. Okay? So what we want to do is just really understand those core work processes. That's how the strategy sort of manifests itself. If I'm a low-cost, if I'm Costco and I'm low-cost strategy, I want to find ways to buy products and merchandise products in the lowest cost way that I can to complement that strategy. Okay? Now, you'll notice there's another word in there, and that's a little bit of a sleight of hand on our part, because sometimes when you bundle work processes in certain ways, the organization ends up having a capability. So if we look at Starbucks, Starbucks has to sort of find coffee and put it in the stores, and it opens stores and runs stores that sell coffee. But Starbucks also has a capability that's unrelated to that directly, that direct work processes, and that is that they're really good at finding good locations for their stores and opening those stores quickly. And that obviously enables them to do the work processes of selling coffee and different kinds of foods in the coffee shop, right? But they have a capability about finding, locating, and opening stores quickly. So we'll talk about not only work processes, but the things that an organization can do that really differentiates it from its competitors in the marketplace. So this is obviously a key part of the model, because it tells you how you're being successful and why you're being successful in the marketplace. Okay? We're going to shift over to core and lateral structures. This is a key part. Obviously, a lot of people believe when they hear the term organization design, they think that means we're going to talk about the structure and the organization chart for the organization. And that's certainly an important part of design, but hopefully by the end of the week we will have disabused you of the knowledge that, or the understanding that the organization chart is the same as OrgDesign. It's just one part of OrgDesign as represented by these other points on the STAR model. Okay? So we're going to talk about two kinds of structure. Core, we'll also use sometimes the term vertical structure. And the core or vertical structure is that organization chart. And it tells us how are you dividing up the different kinds of activities, work processes, competencies, specialties, expertise, products. It's telling us how you're organizing to focus attention and resources on particular things. Are you focusing attention and resources on specialized work called functions? Are you focusing attention and resources on different regions of the world or different regions in the U.S.? Are you focusing attention and resources on products? Right, so you have different product divisions or strategic business units. there's multiple ways that you can set up the core structure of the organization, and each of these core structures has strengths and weaknesses. No such thing as a perfect structure. Any choice that you make is going to be good for some reasons and will have some weaknesses that need to be understood if the organization design is to be effective. So we'll talk about things like what should be centralized as a function and what should be decentralized as an activity inside of a business unit. We'll be making choices about different things like that. And that's all part of the core structure. Almost equally as important is what we call the lateral or horizontal structure, right? And usually a lateral or horizontal structure is used to try and back up the weakness of a core structural choice. So if I focus my core structure on functions, I've got manufacturing and marketing and sales and supply chain, finance, HR, IT, and that's my core structure. The problem is that all those marketing people need to work with the manufacturing people if we're really going to, make the organization effective. Because the marketing people have to be able to go out to the world and say, this is what our product does, and if the manufacturing organization doesn't deliver on that, we've got a problem. So lateral structures break down silos, and we'll be focusing a lot on those lateral organizations and those lateral mechanisms that are necessary to coordinate across different vertical pieces of the organization. So that'll be a big chunk of the. So we'll actually start on that on Tuesday afternoon, and it'll carry on into Wednesday for a good chunk of the day.
This is really key. The laterals are really key. I think what you'll hear us talk about is that the core structure, think of it as the bones, and the laterals are the muscles that go across and make the bones work. And I think you would probably all agree, if you've been involved in any restructure as far as even leading it or being a, I guess, quote-unquote victim of it, you know that the organization is extremely tired and fatigued after going through designing the core structure. So putting the bones of the organization, the org charts. Many times that involves moving people within the organization. Many times it's, exiting people from the organization. And at that point, many leaders, all they want to do is just get everybody back to work. And your job, where you sit, is going to be helping influence the organization that the laterals and the rest of the star that Chris is going to talk about is extremely important. And so Sue Mohrman will be sharing a framework that we use that talks about how do you think through creating these lateral connections across the organization. When is a more formal lateral connection important, and when can a more informal one work, and how do you think through that, and then how do you influence an organization? So while, as Chris said, many leaders think that org design is simply structure, it is a key piece of it. I would say we're going to spend as much time on the core or on laterals as we do the core as well, because it is such an important part of the design process.
Well said. Well said. Let's move on to management processes. Okay, so one of the more common questions we get is, okay, I see work processes up there at the top, but I see management processes down there at the bottom. What's the difference? And if I can, I'll do my best to distinguish them, but work processes are the things that you're doing to add value for your customer. And they're directly related to producing a product or service that is going to be demanded in some way, is wanted in some way by the customer. Management processes are the activities that happen inside the organization to ensure that all the different parts and pieces of the organization are working together. And in that sense, it's a part of a lateral structure, because we're talking about how do we get all these things sort of organized and connected and working with each other. And in that sense, we're going to focus on three really basic management processes that need to be done well. First, the organization has to have a goal-setting process, a direction-setting process. This sometimes happens in your annual strategic planning. Could be your CapEx, your OpEx sort of processes, the kind of things that you're doing to get clear about your budgets. It could be just a straight-up goal-setting process, and who's signing up to accomplish what things. But the organization has to have a clear and strong and powerful goal-setting process so we can set direction and everybody's headed in the same direction and working toward the same things. Organization needs to be clear about decision-making and who gets to make what decisions. It's really a bad thing if you take a product to market and nobody's sure about who's supposed to say what the price is for that product or service. You're going to have a problem there. So we spend time talking about and getting really concrete about what are the most important decisions that need to be made in this new organization we're designing, and who are the stakeholders to that decision, and what are their different roles and responsibilities, and who's got the D in terms of who's making the decision and has the right to make the decision when that decision needs to be made. Because you get into lots of frustration and time wasted when it's not clear. The last thing we'll talk about is probably, on the one hand, it's one of the simplest, and on the one hand, it's one of the most difficult to get your arms around, and that's communication. So we try and get that down to its essence and say, what information needs to get communicated, how is it going to be communicated, who is responsible for disseminating it, and by when. We try and get really concrete about this stuff, but recognizing that, there's all kinds of things that could be communicated, but what are the really important pieces of information that allow you to coordinate the different parts of the organization so everything's in sync? Okay?
Yeah, this point of the star, Chris, I think it's so important because it is many times the things that we assume will happen naturally. Without any deliberate focus, and that's where those of us who've been in roles or are in roles where we have to try to influence the organization, this is where we get a lot of pushback. Like, we don't have time to figure this out. We'll just, it'll all just happen. Well, and that's where you find 6 months, 9 months after a reorg that everything's breaking down because you haven't defined who has the decision-making authority. What is the escalation process? How are we going to set goals? What's going to be different? How is communication now going to flow because we've changed the vertical and horizontal structures? So again, Chris made that comment that this seems pretty straightforward and pretty simple in its as we talk about it, but it is making it come to life in the organization that's really difficult. And we'll talk more about some of the ways in which you can do that. And frankly, I think Becky's presentation, Becky Spears from Oracle on Friday, will really give you some concrete ideas about how can I bring this to life in my organization as she shares her examples.
I also think this is a great example of where the process of OrgDesign and the content of OrgDesign really come together. Because in your old OrgDesign, it may have been very clear who was supposed to make that decision, but as we've changed roles and responsibilities and structures, now 2 or 3 people think it might be their job to make that decision, and that really needs to be clarified, and you can use the process of change to really help make the design itself much more powerful and concrete.
Yeah, exactly.
So rewards, we'll move on to rewards and people. We're starting to move into territory that most of the people in the class are more familiar with. Most of the people in the class tend to come from some kind of an HR organization, and so I won't spend quite as much time here. What we're talking about when we talk about rewards is not just monetary rewards, but also non-monetary. So recognition issues and other non-monetary ways of recognizing performance. And boy, this thing gets really complicated really fast because there's different kinds of rewards and recognition you can use. You can tie those rewards to different metrics or teams or individuals or even the organization. It gets pretty complicated pretty fast, but the idea here is to find ways to motivate people to make the right kind of contribution to the organization. I need people to behave in certain ways, and I need to understand what motivates them to make contributions that help the organization move forward. And then on the last one, we have people, which is sort of looking at and understanding who do we need to bring into the organization. That's obviously the recruiting function. Go ahead and move it forward, Alice. We got the recruiting function. Maybe there we go. Thanks. Recruiting, developing people so that they have the right set of skills and knowledge and competencies to execute the work processes, to operate effectively in the structure that we choose, to be able to make decisions. If you have decision-making responsibility, do we have the people with the right skills and knowledge, experiences to do that? So we'll be talking about leadership development, we'll be talking about retention, development issues, retention kinds of things, and how do we bring people on board so that this piece of the STAR model complements and supports the other things that we've done in the model. Okay? So with that, I hope that I've been able to give you kind of a bird's eye view of the STAR model. We're going to be spending a lot of time talking about it. The first 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday, we'll be going through these different pieces of the STAR model. And then on Thursday and Friday, we'll talk about, okay, now that we've got all these basic pieces, how do we put the STAR model together in different ways? How do we put the STAR model together if we were interested in being customer-centric and customer-focused? How would we use the STAR to design really good functions, HR, IT, finance? Beth's going to take us through a finance redesign that she was responsible for. And then in the afternoon, we'll talk, how would you use the STAR model if you were thinking about building an agile organization? So we'll try and take those foundational pieces and then put them in some contemporary sort of applications so that you can see how the model sort of works and operates inside of organizations. Okay? So with that, let me turn it over to Beth to say a few things about how to get the most out of the workshop.
Great, thank you. So for those of you who will be experiencing OrgDesign for the first time, I went through this course in, I think, 2007 or 2008. I was working at General Mills at the time, and I attended it one session and then brought 6 HR business partners back to the next session and started to build internal capability at General Mills. I now have the esteemed honor of working with Sue and Chris and Alice as part of the USC team, but I think I bring a unique perspective because I attended this course and I know what it feels like to attend it and then try to take all this material back. So I want to just spend a couple minutes about how you can prepare yourself for what's going to happen in Minneapolis and how you can take that back and be extremely useful and extremely effective and impactful with your organization after the session. So
does this involve bringing warm clothes?
I would definitely bring warm clothes. So I'm based in Minneapolis. Okay. For those of you on the call who are not in Minneapolis, you are in for a treat because we've got quite a bit of snow, and it's going to be beautiful, but it is going to be snowy. So we have one final polling question to give Chris, myself, and Sue a sense of what you hope to get out of the workshop. So if you would just on the right-hand side there, click on the top 2. You maybe want to get all of those out of the session, but if you could just choose the top 2, anything from frameworks to benchmarking, ideas on how to build internal design capability. You maybe have your own challenge, you want some advice. You want to expand your network. You want to figure out how do you get your leaders committed to implementing some new designs, and then also because we are a research-based organization and understand what's the current research. So take a couple minutes here and just click off your top 2. And while we have a set agenda for the 3.5 days, this just, again, gives us a better sense of what your expectations and desires are. So Alice, how's it looking?
Getting close. I think we got it. I got 3 people, but that 3 people might be us.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yep. So let's close it and see where.
Close it, and here are your results.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Frameworks and tools.
Plenty of those.
You will come away with more than you know what to do. And some of the things that, and we'll reiterate this, is you will have the opportunity to take all these tools and make them your own. I know that when I attended the course, there were some things, the way in which the USC team positions them, the words didn't translate into General Mills. So what you will talk about, and frankly you'll see when Becky comes on Friday, is how you can take a lot of these tools and frameworks and make them your own to really build capability and understanding within your organization. So that's the top. Advice and answers. Yep, you'll be doing, coming in with your pre-work, so you'll be able to literally do some work on your own challenges, and then you'll have an opportunity to meet with Sue, Chris, and myself before the session, at the end of the day, and as well as over lunch. So we'll talk more about how you can sign up for some individual time with us on that first day.
I'll reinforce that one, Beth. So if you're coming as a team, of 2 or more, Sue, Beth, and I will be sure to find a way to sit down with you and do that. If you're coming as an individual, you can still grab time with us. You just have to kind of grab us by the ear and say, I need to talk with you on the break or over lunch or something like that. But that's certainly a doable thing, and just please reach out to us. We're more than happy to find some time to do that.
Good. So as you think about preparing, I will tell you that there is a lot of material, both in the pre-work as well as in the course. And we have so much material to get through. We won't have a lot of time for you to digest and spend a lot of time reflecting. So one of the things I would tell you right now to do is I would schedule an hour to 90 minutes the week after you return from the course, and literally put it on your calendar now, so that when you come back, that Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, carve out that time to really go through the materials, review your notes, figure out what you might want to take and move forward in your organization. The other way to really help prepare you is to complete that OrgDesign pre-work tool, that yellow booklet. And I will tell you, when I first received that, there is a lot of questions there. And some of you may be at different places as far as projects to be able to complete it. Do the best you can, but what we really want you to be thinking about is anything within your organization that you're either involved in or that you have line of sight to. We want you to think about it and somewhat diagnose it from the aspect of the STAR model. So even jotting down notes as you walk through that pre-work. If you don't have a live project, you're in an organization, so you have line of sight to something that either is recently changed or is about to change. So spend some time with that pre-work tool, and then also read the case studies that are going to be sent out tomorrow. Is that correct, Alice?
Yes.
Yep. So there's a number of case studies that we will use throughout the week, so we're giving some of those to you in advance. But then we also want you to be prepared for some reading in the evenings. It's not overly taxing. It's going to be maybe a 4 to 5 page case study in the evening times to read. But just so you know, we don't want you to be surprised or shocked when at the end of Tuesday or the end of Wednesday we say here's the case to read overnight. And it's nothing that you actually have to work on overnight. It's really just reading it to be prepared. And I will say it's important to read the cases, because when you come in your table discussion, it's only going to be as good as the people are prepared. So in order for you to be able to contribute and get the most out of it, I'd highly recommend you read the cases prior to attending and then doing the homework in the evenings. Chris talked a little bit about those first principles. that's really, we're gonna fill your head with the core knowledge base, and we're gonna give you an opportunity to think about how you can apply it within your organization. But I find that some of the best ways for knowledge to get, to really gain knowledge is to teach it. So what I'd also have you think about is plan in advance who you can share this with. And when I went for the very first time, I scheduled with a small group of business partners about probably 3 weeks after I got back. And I did a lunch and learn where I walked them through the STAR model at a very high level. That's one way for you to really solidify the knowledge, is to turn around now and very quickly teach it to a few folks. And what resonates, what doesn't resonate, how might you move this forward. The other thing is, if any of you on this call are coming with a few folks from your organization to the session, the other thing you can think about is carving out time over lunch or breaks or in the evening, going out to dinner, and as a collective talk about how might we move this forward in our organization. You have a unique time as a small team to be away from the office, to be away from the day-to-day challenges. Use this time as a group to share and discuss how you might move it forward in your organization. So those are lessons from the trenches of having gone through the course, but we'd like to open it up now and see if there are any questions you have about the materials, about the logistics.
Everybody's been unmuted.
Minneapolis. So you can either just shout the question out, or you can go to the chat box.
Go to the chat box too. Yeah, it's always easy.
Type it in.
Easy. Yep. If you want to ask questions, of course, if we were just perfectly clear and there were no questions, then that's always, I suppose, a possibility. But often there are more questions than answers.
Hi.
With this stuff.
Hello.
Fire away. Yep.
Hi, it's Johanna. I actually sent in a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Oh.
So sorry about that. I was just asking some questions back to the actual model. I don't know if we can go back to that. So my two questions primarily were, where do you see leadership behaviors and organization culture playing? A lot of, what you were talking about was very sort of process-oriented, of course, but I wanted to understand a little bit more about the behaviors that enable the process, and then the climate and the culture that we co-create that actually unleashes that.
Got it. I'll start, Beth, and then you can chime in. So the first place leadership shows up is over on the people side of the STAR, and okay. What you're hoping for is that through the people set of processes, you have a leadership development program that begins to teach people the kinds of behaviors, influence, visioning, whatever you're defining as part of leadership. And so the first place it's kind of gonna go is over there on the people side. The tricky part of your question is that as you're going through the redesign process, not the choices, right, about the content of the STAR model, but you're also going through a redesign process, and you need people probably to lead that change effort. And what are the kinds of behaviors that are most helpful? And so we'll be touching a little bit on that. We'll be spending more time again on the content side of things, but there is obviously a leadership component in all of that. One of the things that will happen toward the end of day one, I think it is, Beth.
Yes.
We'll talk specifically about where culture plays in all this. It doesn't have the short version is culture is an outcome. Culture is a result of the choices that you make around these different STAR elements, and if you're trying to change the culture, it's pretty hard to do that directly. It's pretty hard to tell people that their mindsets are wrong or their values are wrong, but you can set a context for how people behave and think by using each of the points of the STAR as a signal to people about how they're supposed to behave and think. And so we'll definitely address that toward the end of the day on Tuesday, because it is a question that sort of shows up. And then one other little piece, I will pick up a little bit on it when I talk about agility, because what's happening, I think, in the Agile organizations is the distinction between strategy and culture start to get really blurred. And we'll talk about identity of the organization as a key part of agility that includes culture. Anything to add there, Beth?
No, I think I'm glad you brought the question up, and it is a discussion that we will have, and I think we'll talk about how are we seeing your organizations go after it, and are they being deliberate about looking at all the levers more holistically, or as I see many organizations, it's going after we need to change the mindsets. We need to, which there's a piece of it, but you also have to be looking at what are the levers that you're pulling, either deliberately or not, that are impacting the culture, looking at it more holistically from each point of the star.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, you'll find out we have lots of attitudes about some of these things.
Yeah.
And we don't always we don't always agree. We don't always agree. So that makes for a pretty rich conversation.
It does, and what strikes me after you were saying that, I saw like the input of strategy obviously kind of coming into the top of the STAR model, but from an output perspective, you mentioned culture is really an output, business results are an output. So I'd be interested to talk through or see where that comes in and sort of how we're then measuring our success in how we're adapting.
Yeah,
that would be another one I'd like to learn about.
Yeah. Yep. You're on the hot seat for that one, Beth.
Yep. And then we've got a question from Mark.
Okay.
Will there be a focus on when change management is important for a redesign?
So the answer is yes.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about a specific. We won't talk about organization development or change management in a generic way. We have a redesign flow, a redesign process that we go through that is specifically adapted to the design, to OrgDesign. Once you look at it, you'll see, oh, yeah, that's a change management org development model, but it's a specific one that we're going to walk you through as, again, kind of a background. It'll be kind of in the background. We'll address it specifically, but again, what we think the weakest link in all of this is the content knowledge about these choices and first principles about, which structures and which management processes and how to help people get to those decisions. So it'll be very much in the background of what we talk about as opposed to the foreground.
And I think as you hear some of the case studies, and you hear Becky on Friday as well, you will be hearing about where change management activities need to be inserted, where those are taking place, and really as you start building stakeholders through creating your design criteria. I mean, what we talk about is we see those mutually dancing together, OrgDesign and change are mutually, what's the word I'm looking for, Chris?
Yeah, they work together.
They work together, yes, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
And I see we're at the
Other comments and questions? Yeah.
I want to be respectful of people's time, so if you need to jump off, but if you've got other questions, we can hang here a few more minutes.
Sure. Yep. But if you need to go, thanks for coming, and we'll see you in Minneapolis.